When the U.S. Iran conflict erupts alongside political factors, the entire world worries about fuel issues if Hormuz is closed. Therefore, the question arises, can the world escape its dependence on the Strait of Hormuz, or will this choke point forever remain the fatal weakness of the global economy? Is there any other path for nations? Reality shows that a full-scale war is not necessary. Just a disruption at one bottleneck can cause the global economy to stagger almost instantly. Amidst the escalating tensions between the US and Iran, many assessments often focus on military or diplomatic factors. However, a structural variable lies in geography itself. The Strait of Hormuz, where nearly 20% of global crude oil must pass through every day. According to experts, this is not just a maritime route, but the bottleneck of the world's energy system. A narrow corridor, yet it dictates the global economic flow. The paradox lies in the fact that as economies expand and become increasingly interdependent, the most vital transport route is compressed into an extremely fragile space. A single incident, whether a military conflict, a technical disruption, or a maritime accident, is enough to trigger a chain reaction: skyrocketing oil prices, escalating transport costs, and widespread inflationary pressure. Notably, to date, there is almost no alternative plan of sufficient scale to relieve the pressure on Hormuz. This means the world is still betting on the stability of a single choke point, a gamble where risks are always present. Looking at a map, the Persian Gulf is merely an energy-producing region. But when placed within the operating system of the global economy, one sees that it is actually the power hub for the entire world. And the Strait of Hormuz is the only door for that energy to flow out. Approximately 20 million barrels of oil per day, equivalent to nearly 20% of global consumption, must pass through this point. In other words, a single narrow corridor carries 1/5 of humanity's energy needs. Therefore, Hormuz is not simply a maritime route. It is a switch. And the problem is, this switch is located in one of the most unstable regions in the world. Tension between Iran and the West is not a new story, but in the current context, the risk has shifted from a hypothetical scenario to an imminent threat. Events such as ship seizures, tanker attacks, or military escalations are no longer rare exceptions, but have become part of a new normal. When Hormuz trembles, the first reaction is always oil prices. Recent analyses show that a prolonged disruption could result in a loss of 13 to 14 million barrels per day from global supply, a figure sufficient to push oil prices past the $100 per barrel mark in a very short time. But the story does not stop there. Rising energy prices lead to higher transport costs, which then spread to commodity prices, and finally, inflation. This means an incident in the Middle East can quickly become a problem for the pockets of consumers anywhere. It is noteworthy that the world is not blind to this risk. For many years, Gulf nations have tried to find ways to bypass Hormuz. Saudi Arabia built a pipeline system to the Red Sea, allowing exports without passing through the strait. The UAE also developed a pipeline to the port of Fujairah, located outside Hormuz. But the issue is scale. These routes can only replace a small fraction. Recent estimates suggest that all existing alternatives combined can only handle about 13 to 28% of normal traffic. This means that even in the most optimistic scenario, the majority of oil is still forced to pass through Hormuz. And this is the crux of the matter. The world has tried to reduce its dependence, but has never truly escaped it. From that reality, an idea of geographic redesign began to emerge. If risk cannot be avoided through politics or existing infrastructure, could the map itself be changed? The Musandam Canal, a route cutting straight through Omani territory, connecting the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman, is envisioned as a complete exit from Hormuz. Theoretically, it would allow tankers to bypass the world's most dangerous choke point, minimizing geopolitical risks and creating a safer transport route. This idea sounds very appealing because it addresses a core issue: dependence on a single point. But the fact that it is frequently mentioned also shows something else, that so far the world has yet to find a truly feasible solution to replace Hormuz. And when a technical dream idea starts to be discussed seriously, it is usually a sign that a massive flaw exists within the current system. But moving away from the map and returning to reality, the idea of a canal across the Musandam Peninsula quickly encounters very real-world barriers: technical, financial, and political. First is the technical story. Musandam is not a flat, desert-like strip of land where one can simply dig down to create a canal as in many other areas. This is the protrusion of the Hajar Mountains, one of the harshest terrains in the Middle East. Steep limestone mountains with many peaks over 2,000 meters high stretch right to the coast. This means that creating a canal route sufficient for large tankers is not digging a canal but splitting a mountain. The volume of earth and rock to be processed is not just measured in millions but potentially billions of cubic meters. Not to mention, this is not a canal for small boats. Very large crude carriers, VLCCs, hundreds of meters long with deep drafts, require extreme depth and width. The canal would not only need to be deep enough but also stable, resistant to landslides, and able to withstand constant traffic pressure. Ensuring maritime safety in such a structure alone is a complex technical puzzle, let alone the construction. The second issue is cost. Looking back at history, the expansion of the Panama Canal, one of the largest infrastructure projects of the 21st century, cost about $5 billion, but that was under much more favorable terrain conditions. For Musandam, informal estimates often place the figure in the hundreds of billions of dollars, potentially even higher if land clearance, environmental processing, and associated infrastructure costs are fully accounted for. This is no longer a project for a single nation, but a financial gamble on a global scale. And then there is the political factor, which is perhaps the most difficult barrier to overcome. The entire Musandam region is under Omani sovereignty. This means that no matter how attractive the idea is, it cannot be implemented without absolute consensus from this nation. However, Oman currently has no clear incentive to pursue such a terrain-breaking project, especially when their development strategy is oriented toward tourism, seaports, and regional stability. Furthermore, such a canal would require the participation of many nations, Gulf countries, energy-consuming powers, and international investors. And with that comes long-term security commitments, because such a strategic transport route, if built, would immediately become a target in every conflict scenario. At that point, the question is no longer, can it be built, but who will protect it and how? Right here, a reality begins to emerge. Not everything that can be drawn on a map can be built in real life. Geography is not just space, it is also a limit. But even assuming all those barriers could be overcome, the canal is finished, ships begin to circulate, another paradox appears. The new canal does not eliminate the bottleneck, it only creates a different one. History provides a very clear example: the Suez Canal. It is one of the most important maritime routes in the world, significantly shortening the journey between Europe and Asia. But at the same time, it is a literal bottleneck. In 2021, just one ship running aground for a few days disrupted the global supply chain, leaving hundreds of ships waiting and causing billions of dollars in economic damage. Suez shows something very simple. The more you optimize a transport route, the more vulnerable the system becomes. A canal at Musandam, if it existed, would be no exception to that rule. It could still be blocked by accidents, disrupted by conflicts, or become a target in deliberate attacks. Instead of depending on Hormuz, the world would depend on a new, artificial, expensive, and equally fragile new Hormuz. And that is the most important insight. Humans do not actually eliminate choke points. They only move them from one place to another. This leads to a broader conclusion. The problem does not lie solely with Hormuz. It lies in how the global trade system is constructed. For centuries, the flow of goods and energy has always been dominated by geography, straits, canals, and narrow routes that hold immense strategic value. These knots are not exceptions, but an inevitable part of the system. Hormuz is simply the most vivid example at the moment. It converges all factors: economic importance, geopolitical risk, and a lack of alternatives. But if it weren't Hormuz, there would always be another Hormuz existing somewhere else in the global trade network. Therefore, the question is not just whether a new canal can be built, but how the world will adapt to these choke points.